Hi guys. Well, it is August the 8th, 2025, and the time is now 11:08 a.m. and I'm recording from Toowoomba, Queensland, Australia. I am to recount and retell the story of my meeting with Al the Angel on Vancouver Island in British Columbia, Canada. It was this date 18 years ago exactly. However, because Australia is ahead by about 17 hours, it was actually August the 7th, 2007, on the island, Vancouver Island, in Sidney, S-I-D-N-E-Y. And I was there on another trip looking for the Christ on the earth when I had to change my plans, delay by another 4 weeks. And it was the 4th of August, I was supposed to return to Sydney, Australia, when I found myself on a ferry going to Sydney, BC, British Columbia. Now, it began by my being in the house that we were staying in as guests, and we were to actually leave the day that I had this encounter. However, the engineers of the BC ferries called a strike, so there were no ferries going back to the mainland. Now, this had occurred in my life some years before, and I knew, okay, this is a God thing, because at that time I was actually at Sydney Airport expecting to get on an aeroplane when suddenly the ground engineers called a strike and no planes were taking off, and I go, okay, this is a God thing. So all those years later, here I am realizing this is a God thing. Now, staying in the house that I was staying in, I was given a bench to sleep on. It was about, I'm only 5 feet tall, but it wasn't 5 feet long. No, because I had to bend my knees to get in, and it was about, 16 inches wide with a narrow cushion on it, because it was actually the entrance, or the vestibule, you call it, after the front door. Anyway, long story short, that's where I was sleeping. And so this morning that I woke, I could feel this pull on my soul, and all I could hear was, go for a walk, go for a walk. So I didn't have to disturb anybody else because I was right at the entrance there. And, oh, okay, I'm being reminded. The day before, the one who thought that she was Mary Magdalene and it was all about her, hence she took the queen-size bed in the house, that's okay. She heard this knocking at the door in her spirit. And she came out and she said, did anybody else hear that knock? And like, no. And why is it that only I hear these things? Okay, all right. So that was the day before. Well, this morning I'm obeying the call on my soul, and to go for a walk. So I did. And I started wandering around the town, and it's a very pretty town. Of course, and it's on the ocean. And I ended up going to a cafe and having a pot of tea and a blueberry muffin. And I left the cafe having paid the bill, and I looked at the clock, and it was 8:40 a.m. So then I wandered down through the back streets, and I looked at nurseries, and I ended up down on the foreshore. There was a path and people were jogging, and so I walked up to note there were benches along the foreshore, and then I walked up the main street of Sydney on Vancouver Island, and some of the shops had been renovated, and they were looking very quaint. And I was actually looking in the window of a liquor store, but it was looking really quaint, like a saloon, I suppose, out of, the days of the Western. And I was thinking, oh, isn't that cute? And I'm looking through the window, and then I turn around to begin walking, and right there, about 5 feet away from me, is a man with a bicycle, and I note a bag of bottles resting over the rack of behind the seat. And he was my height with my colour hair. You know, I'm greying. Well, actually, I'm going platinum. I'm not greying, but anyway, it was my colour hair, that strawberry gold, curly, fair skin with freckles, myself, and blue eyes, the colour of my eyes. And I'm looking at him, he's looking at me, and the first thing he said to me is, "Do you have the time?" And in my mind I'm going, oh my God. And the wheels are clicking over, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, I left the cafe at 8:40, so 20, you know, and I said to him, it must be about 9 o'clock. Now, in my mind, because I didn't wear a watch. I didn't wear a watch for decades. I still don't. In my mind, I'm thinking 9 o'clock, 999, the fullness of time. And I knew immediately that this was a divine appointment. And this man, looking like me as a man, had to be an angel. So he began the conversation because he knew that I'd observed the bag with the bottles, 2 white plastic bags tied together over the saddle, which was a wire rack behind the seat. And I noticed that there were beer bottles, empty beer bottles, etc., or whatever. And he just said to me, you know, within those bags, he said, they took me about 1 hour to collect. He said, but I will return them and be paid about $40 for them. And I said to him, and I noticed that the bottles were brown and they had a gold label around the neck. That's what I could see. And I said to him, yes, there is gold in garbage. Now, that began the conversation. And he picked up on the thread, the gold in garbage, which happened to be a theme in my life before the end of the marriage, and is exactly what we had been working on, if you like, gold in garbage. Yes. Oh, and I'm just hearing, not may, but will still come to pass, because, yeah, all right, okay. Now, he excused himself to go into the store, and then he came out with an extra tall, in Australia we call a can of beer a tinny, which are about that height. Well, this one was extra. And he walked with the tinny, and I said to him, shall we continue this conversation down by the water where I'd noticed the bench seats? So we did. We walked down there, sat, and this is where 2 parts of my, and I call it interview with Al the Angel. He introduced himself as Al. Oh. And Al began to tell me his story, which he was recording within a book, like a diary, only the book looked ancient. As a matter of fact, I'm reminded that the book looks like the 1698 Bible that Yah found on eBay years before I found him, and it was sent to him from America, and within it was a seed, but also the names of the family members and the young boy James, who lived just 777 days. And the book that Al was writing in reminded me of that years later. Not now, because this is before I've found Yah. of course, everything within me and why I was back in Canada, I was looking for the Christ on the earth, knowing that the whole world had been deceived about how he would come. And I had vowed in 1999 on August the 14th that if you are here unto death would I find you. And that was the experience I had then, when I was filled with a flame from my belly and it consumed me. And it's like, okay, I get it. I'm bending over going, laughing. I get it. But all right, so here we are, and here I am. And I know that I'm having this divine encounter with Al the angel. Now, it was an imparting of information. As he was telling his story, what was happening within me, the scriptures were unfolding in my mind, and he's knowing exactly what's going on in my mind. And I quickly learned that it was about judgment. About judgment. Will you judge? Will you judge? Because some of the stories that he told me were, they were, well, the first thing he told me that the element of a good story had to have, 3 elements make up a good story, whether it be a book or a play, whatever. The first is humour, the second was poignant, and the third was grit. Now, humour we all understand, you laugh at it. But poignant is when it creates, when what it is that you are hearing creates within the hearer a visceral, emotional reaction or feeling within the hearer. And, it can be like this, or, oh my God, like that. But it's sharp and it's a visceral reaction. And the third is grit. What is grit? Well, it's really hard and gritty and hard to take. And it can do damage, right? So we're talking about True Grit, the movie, whatever. It's hard to take. The 3 elements. So are we talking about airy-fairy here, where everything's, airy-fairy? No, we're talking about life. And so Al's book was about the life he had led and his stories. So and he had me hold a $10 Canadian note that he was given by a man, and that man, according to Al's story, was the one who told Al about the 3 elements that make a good story. And that man gave to Al the $10 as the seed to publish Al's story. So Al had that note, and he asked me, would you like to hold it? And I did, so I held the seed. The seed for Al's story, and then gave it back to him. Now, lots of things played out during that first part of the interview. One of them was that that's right, a jogger was approaching from my right. And Al stands up and he stops him and asks him if he had a cigarette, and then gave him a loonie, which is a Canadian $1 coin. And now, how many joggers do you know? I don't know too many that actually smoke, but they're jogging with their cigarettes out there. But anyway, the jogger pulls out a pack of cigarettes, takes one cigarette out and gives it to Al and accepts the loonie. And I knew I had $5 change from the cafe. So I go, well, here, I've got $5, would you like 5 more? I'm thinking about Al getting 5 more for Al. He just looked at me and says, no, it's all right, thank you. I mean, it was hysterical after. Anyway, so the conversation continued. Now, I was actually on this particular trip, and I was going to see, oh no, that's right, I had already been to see her, a woman in my life who owned two mountains inside of Washington state. And those two mountains, one was called the Old Glory and the other was the Noble Lady. And they were actually mining leases that she had held and protected with her life, and did cost the life of her husband, to develop, because she was actually a miner and her children were raised to be miners. And before I left Australia, I thought to call her. I couldn't even remember where it was, and it all came back to me in a flash, and I tracked down her phone number, and from Australia left a message that I was going to be in the USA and through the summer, and would she like me to come down and see her. When I phoned again about 3 days later to make connection with her, she told me before I phoned that she had been saying to her family, does anybody know where Janelle is? Because when we met all those years before, the first time in 1996, it was actually when we were living in Washington State, and then later when we were back in Vancouver living there, and I'd travelled down because I'd made connection with her then. And she had been asking her, where is Janelle? Does anybody know where Janelle is? Is she still in Canada or is she in Australia? So I leave the call and I'm in Australia saying, I'm coming back, would you like to see me? And yes, so that's the purpose for being on that trip. Now, I had already accomplished that part of the trip, and what it was, she wanted me to sell the Noble Lady for her, the mine, because in her mind, having met me all those years before and knowing, connecting, she was a Seventh-day Adventist, but connecting not only as women but also as Christians, and she wanted, and she said to her family, there's nobody else that I can trust but Janelle to do this for me. Her life had been spent protecting these mining lands from rich, evil men. And I mentioned Simplot Potatoes, Idaho, mega wealthy, did everything within his power to get those leases from her. Now, so back to the interview with Al the Angels, because one of the mines was filled with platinum, gold, silver, platinum, and gemstones. And so he was telling me that at that time, so this is 2007, there was a shortage of platinum, and it was necessary for every catalytic converter, so every motor on the planet, to run as a catalytic converter. So he was giving me information and the importance of a platinum mine that was unknown at that to governments, if you like, at the time. So, long story short, this was all part of the information flow. Okay, got it. Then he went on to tell me about one of his trips, riding his bicycle all the way up to Calgary, where my two daughters are living today. But Calgary, he mentioned that the wealthy people of Calgary, so we're talking about oil men, wealthy people of Calgary had taken upon themselves to raise the money amongst themselves to build what ended up being 2 apartment buildings to house the homeless of Calgary. And the only condition that people had to agree to when they are given these apartments was that they had to contribute whatever it was that they could possibly contribute physically, whether be cleaning or skills in maintenance or cooking, but maintaining the building and running the building. And so as he's telling me this, he had come across a thermometer, and this is in Calgary after he'd ridden his bicycle all the way there. We're talking about 500 miles, I think it was, 800 kilometers, whatever. And I'm thinking, yeah, right, okay. He told me that he took that concept back to a reverend in Victoria. Now, Victoria is the capital of British Columbia, but it is on Vancouver Island. And he told me the name of the Reverend, and downtown. And so anyway, I'm taking note because that is what was occurring now in Victoria. And Al made it known that all he did was he, like snow, picked up the snowball. So this is the concept and the idea. And he released it. And of course, as it's rolling downhill, it's gathering more and more snow until it becomes a giant snowball. And that's what happens with ideas. Right. So I'm taking note of all this and of the Reverend downtown. And I'm pretty sure it was on, either his name was Johnson or it was on Johnson Street. But I'm taking note of all of this, thinking to myself, I have to go and see this man. All right, so that was the first part of the interview. Then I invited him, would you like to come and meet my friends back at the house? The man who owned the house, his name was Greg, and he was a long-time friend of the one I was with who thought that she was Mary, as in Mary Magdalene. Anyway, long story short. So now, we'd been through the conversation about the tinny. He'd opened the tinny and taken about 2 sips. And then we had this discussion about the benefits of the hops and barley and the things that constitute a beer and the health benefits of each. And he said that this was his drink of choice since he cycled about 20 miles every day in his picking up of garbage to turn it in for cash, the gold in the garbage. And then he said, I never touch spirits. And I knew why, because spirits open the door for, spirits that want to occupy. And yes, and he just said, they are what the name is, the entry for spirits. He never touched them, but beer was his drink of choice. I've actually been reading books from 10th century and 10th century England, and yes, everybody drank ale, a weak ale, watered down ale, breakfast. They didn't drink water alone, they drank ale. So, moving right along, he agreed, yes, I'll come back to meet your friends at the house, and then walking back now through the main street of Sydney, he had put the tinny in the arm of his leather jacket and then was pushing and walking beside me on my right, pushing the bicycle. And we as we're going, the contents of the tinny spill on his left side to be down his jeans, and in my mind I'm going, oh my God, he's going to smell like a brewery when he gets to the house. What will the others think? That's going on in my mind, because we'd already had the discussion. He is a homeless man for 40 years. Nobody had ever offered him a place to lay his head, and the scriptures are unfolding about the Son of Man and nowhere to lay his head, etc. And I asked him, I said, nobody in all 40 years had ever, given you a... No, he said. So I asked him, what do you do about your clothing? Because he was very clean. And he let it be known that he didn't like being dirty at all. And after about 3 days of wearing the same clothes, he would go to over here we call them Vinnies in the Salvation Army, and purchase, because he had cash from his findings, purchase new clothing, new second-hand clothing. He made it very clear that he didn't like to be dirty in any way, clothing or otherwise. So with the spilling of this beer, I'm going, oh my God, here we go, this is going to be interesting. Now, we stopped. I didn't remember the address of where we were staying at Greg's house, but he left me to cross over at traffic lights, stoplights. And he said to me that he would join me at Greg's house after he had cashed in his recyclable bottles. And I'm thinking, this is all residential. Anyway, I said, yes, okay. So I continued walking on this side of the main road, and I took about 6 paces, and I turned around expecting to see Al now crossing over at the pedestrian lights. Like, maybe he'd reach the other side. I turned around and he wasn't anywhere to be seen. And then when I looked ahead, I noticed that he was now ahead of me on the other side of, I think it was 4 lanes altogether, 2-way, 1-way and 2-way the other way. So it was 4 lanes of the main road. And he's on his bicycle, but when you're going so slow that you're wobbling like this and you think you're going to fall off because you're going so slow. But he was ahead of me. And I'm thinking, yeah, right. I already knew about the veil of time, and he'd vanished, and he was now, he'd been in and out of the veil, to be ahead of me, observed ahead of me, as I'm now walking back, which took about, 10 minutes to get back to Greg's house, and me not able to give him the address. He just said, I'll see you there. So I get back to Greg's house, and I'm full of all of this that has just encountered, because between the 3 of us, we expected to find the Lord himself at any moment. That was like the secret of the 3 of us being together. We were looking for the Lord, and Greg himself had built a garden at the back of his house, expecting that the Lord could be there any day. So I come back into the house, and when I left the house, Greg's car wasn't there. So I get back, and Greg's full of what happened to him when he left the house. And so before I could say anything, we're all in the kitchen, and he's saying, Janelle, I have a message for you. And what had happened to him, he had taken his car to the gas station to fill it up. And while he was there, and this had happened to Greg before, so for him it wasn't unusual, he had the bowser in, but the hose in, filling up, but he himself had been leaning against his car, went into a slump like this and closed his eyes. And then when he came to, he opened his eyes to what he described as a 9-foot angel, blonde hair, blue eyes, and he took up the entire frame of Greg's vision. And this angel's talking to Greg, and he says that I have a message for Janelle. And the message was, are you ready for the adventure of your lifetime? And the admonition was to remember it's all about the journey and not the destination. So Greg is telling me this, and I'm going, it's already started. I'm trying to get out the angel, and he's going to be here, and so I'm making all these hand signs and all the rest of it. And then he continued to turn to the one who thought she was Mary in the queen-size bed. Anyway, and the message was, I have saved the last dance for you. So she's all excited. Oh, it's the Lord, he's coming for you. Okay, all right. So she, all right. So I just, okay. Well, let's get ready, because I'm expecting Al, the angel, at the door. Sure enough, I didn't know the timing at this point in time. There was a knock at the door, so I go and I open the door, and there's Al, minus his back, minus his bike. That's right, he didn't have his bike. I'm just remembering. Okay, yeah. He's just standing there, and I open the door and I say, Al, come on in. So So I bring him inside. Now, I'll just call her the one who thought she was Mary. Her son wasn't well. He'd had a really bad fever and he was lying on the couch. And he'd been that way for a day or so. Now, this beautiful boy, I'd taken it upon myself for a few years to bring him to my home amongst my 4 children, and for the weekend to give his mother a break, because she was a single mother. And she had injured herself giving birth to her gorgeous little boy, who happened to have the colour hair that was my colour. And so he passed as my son, but he was a beautiful little boy and he used to love coming down, spending time with us. And I have to say, to be amongst family and normal, because he was an only child. Well, he'd been lying on the couch and right. So I escort Al, the angel, into the garden that Greg had prepared at the back of his house for the Lord. And it was covered and he had, plants and things around. There was a round table. So Al and I sat down opposite each other. And Greg is fussing around, and he had his elderly father. He was 92 years of age that he was caring for. And then, of course, there was the one who thought she was Mary, and then Benny not well on the lounge, etc., etc. So we take up our positions now, and Al looks at me and he says, would you like to hear a story from his book? I said, oh, yes. So we're reading a story to me, and it was, he'd already read one, that's right, down by which was pretty, well, it was gritty. Okay, like, okay. All right, and it was actually about shooting wild pigs, so like boars, that kind. Okay, all right, it's pretty gritty. So this one, he read to me another one that I was just really into it and emoting with it, and then some time had passed, and Greg came out, and a conversation began between Greg and Al. And anyway, Greg recognised him from an encounter that he knew to be an angel about 9 years before, when the one who thought she was Mary was also with him. And at that time, she'd been locked in the car, so she wasn't part of what was going on. But the encounter was with Greg, and at that time, Greg was living in an apartment, and the cover story for Al was that he was a window washer. And so, again, and the reason that we were there at this time was because Greg and the one who thought she was Mary were continuing the writing of their book, which featured this encounter 9 years before. So Greg recognized. Anyway, Greg asked me if I would go out and check the time on the digital clock above the TV, because it was about lunchtime and he was thinking about his father and that kind of thing. So I did that. I went out and I noted that the time was 10 minutes past 12, 10 minutes past midday. And Benny was still on the couch, and then I've gone back out to report to Greg, who's been with Al, that it's 10 minutes after 12, and suddenly I remembered, wait on, in the writings that I'd already written, there was about, that OK Corral and its showdown at high noon. I suddenly remembered, wait on, Al was on the doorstep, it must have been noon, high noon, and the showdown at OK Corral. So this is all going through my mind because it was already written. And it came from me all these years as the one who thought she was Mary's, demanding to know this, that, and the other. And the story came from my heart, the dialogue on my heart that wasn't me. Okay. I was just writing what I was hearing. So we go out again, and Al asked me again if I wanted to hear another story. So he read it in front of Greg this time, and it was really poignant, because it was about being in a war, and you know, the horror of the war, and it ended with Al standing right beside his best friend, and his best friend gets a bullet right between his eyes. Talk about poignant. And gritty. Oh my God. That was my reaction. But Greg, you can see, is getting kind of offended. So he makes his leave to look after lunch for his aging father. And then when Greg leaves, Al says to me again, would you like to hear another story? And I said, yes. So this time, he is telling me about a highway. And in the distance, on this highway, and as soon as he said highway, I'm thinking about the highway of the redeemed as described in Isaiah 35. Go and read it. But in the distance, he sees the Lord himself, who had come to take Al home. And he described, and I'm crying as I'm there with him, seeing what he's describing. It was amazing. So that story finishes as soon as Greg had left. And then that is when that story finishes. Greg comes back out, and he has made a sandwich in a glad bag, sandwich bag, and an apple, and he's placed it on the table beside Al, and he said, I made you some lunch. But the implication was that, when you go kind of thing. He could have put it on a plate and brought it out to have, sitting at the table, but no, it was like a packed lunch to go. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness gracious me, what's going to go down here? Now, Al brings the sandwich close to him, but he pushes the apple away. And he says, thank you, but he pushes the apple away. And he simply says that I've picked up enough apples to last 2 lifetimes. And of course, I'm thinking about the apple and the parable of Eden and the bite of the apple and this falling into sin and all the rest of it. But 2 lifetimes, because here I am looking for the Lord on the earth, and Al the angel is talking about to last 2 lifetimes. So I'm going, oh my God. Now, of course, it flew straight over Greg's head. He got, oh, well, if it's not good enough for you kind of thing. And it was then that the conversation came. That's right, it was then the conversation came. Greg recognizing Al, and Al, okay. And didn't I meet you years ago and you used to wash windows? And Al looks at Greg and just says, well, yes, but I don't wash windows anymore. Now, the windows are the window to the soul from the scriptures. And I'm thinking about those, okay. But Al says, but I'll make an exception for you. Would you like me to come and wash your windows? And Greg goes, oh, okay. Yes, all right. And then Al asks, would you like me to wash the inside as well as the outside? And Greg will go, oh my God. But Greg's going, yes, okay, yes. And then Greg says to Al, when could you come? And Al says, well, sometime next week, like toward the end of the week. And then Greg asks, how much can I pay you? And Al thinks, and he goes, oh, $30. Oh, and I'm thinking about the 30 pieces of silver, the betrayal in the garden, Judas and the 30 pieces of silver. Oh my God, so this is all going through my mind. I can hardly breathe but it's just going right over Greg's head. So, okay, that's the agreement. He goes back into the kitchen, and then now Al's looking directly at me. And he extended his hand toward me as if to shake my hand. And so I extended my right hand, but he took me by the arm like this, and then he's got tears in his eyes, and I've got tears in my eyes because, I'm thinking, okay, this is the conclusion of our time together. And he said to me, you are my right arm. And I'm thinking to myself, I already know that because it was all part of the writings from the dialogue of my heart, and I was told in this that you are my right arm. So I'm going, okay, all right, yes, I already know that. But, and I'm just crying. And he said, I am so pleased to have met you. Okay, so then that moment passes and he stands up to leave, and he takes the sandwich, he leaves the apple, and we're both standing. And now as he turns to go and walks several paces towards the entrance to the kitchen where Greg was coming and going, now, and I just call her the one who thought she was Mary, comes out. And Al says to her, what's wrong with the boy? And she goes, nothing that we can't handle. Well, I'm a praying woman, this kind of thing, blah, 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 and all the rest of it. And he mentioned about perhaps he should see a doctor. Well, that's when she starts doing her dance. Well, it was a dance. Her hijinks, foot to foot like this, arms up, shaking. This, and she points at Al, and she says to him, you're a, did she say drunkard, or I think she said that you're a drug addict, and maybe a drunkard, because she could smell the beer on him, which is what I expected. But she said that he had a problem with anger. So Al just simply says to her, I have a problem with anger. Now I'm watching this scene take place, and it was horrifying to me. But what was occurring was that as she's dancing from foot to foot like this, Al's doing this, and I remembered the message, I'll save the last dance for you. Here they were like boxers in a ring when they are sparring. It's actually dancing. I'll save the last dance for you. Well, she rose up and told him to get out of Greg's garden that he'd made for the Lord himself. And he said to her, don't worry, I'm leaving. He looks at me and I'm horrified. But the connection was, do you see the deception? And then he left. He vanished. He just vanished. He was gone. Oh my God. What had been a sunny day, probably about 25 degrees Celsius, warm sunny day. The temperature dropped about 10 degrees and now it was shivering. It was grey, overcast, a wind came up, and I'm thinking about hell freezing over and all this kind of thing, and oh my God, I go into the kitchen and she now is railing at me for allowing Al into the house, and Benny says he's got demons all over him, and I just dropped to my knees and I threw my arms up in the air and I just said, Lord, as I'm looking at her, deliver me from all deception. Then I got up and I couldn't stand being in the place, and I said, I'm going to the supermarket, I'll get she wanted peanut butter for her son, and I'll go and get the peanut butter. And I walked out and it was freezing cold. I was shivering and I was thinking about what had taken place, and I had to cross at a crossing, and I did, into the middle of the road where there are lights, and I got to the middle island and I turned and there's Al. He's immediately back. This time he's got his bicycle, and he said to me, what is her name? And as he said it, his head was turning, and I said, I told her name, which he knew anyway, but again the scripture was he said to me, that's right, he said to me, that's right, I started to say that, like in fairness to her, she's a praying woman, we're both praying women, and that's right, he said to me, there are good doctors. If the boy does not improve, take him to a doctor. And I promised him I would. Then he said, I trust your word over hers. That's right. And that's when he asked, what is her name? I told her name, and then that's when he turned his head and said, I don't know her. The scriptures unfolding. Oh my goodness, many will in that day say to me, Lord, Lord, did I not do this, that, all in your name? And his response will be, depart from me, ye workers of iniquity, for I never knew you. Oh my gosh. Then he called me Gazelle. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, that's weird. He knows my name. He called me Gazelle. And then he said to me, I will see you again. And he got on his bike, but then he vanished behind the veil of time in an instant. And I was left to cross over at the lights, go to the supermarket, and I was still freezing. Everything was freezing. My mind was it was in awe, but it was in terror for what had occurred, the offense of what had occurred. I'm thinking, this is the angel of the Lord. She threw him out of the garden prepared by Greg for the Lord himself. She threw him out and Greg didn't recognize him. All right, so I got the peanut butter, I went back to the house, and I was sad, I was in lament, I was angry. The ferries, were back the next morning. We left. I'm thinking about our story and the downtown Victoria. I found the building that he was talking about where this reverend was doing this good work on behalf of the homeless and the drug addicts and all of them. I left her in the car not to come with me. You know, she had her son there. So I just left and I walked into the building. And from a distance, I saw this very tall man. He must have been, he seemed to be taller than Yah. Yah was 6'3". This man might have been 6'5". And he saw me walking down the hallway. He had long hair that was brown, kind of red, reddy brown, very fair skin and blue eyes. And so I walked up to him and I said, "Are you Reverend?" And I said, "I'm here after meeting Al." And he looked at me and says, "Ah, you met Al." "Yes," I said. So come this way, led me into a boardroom meeting area. It was all a very basic building. I sat down and I told him why I was there, being, you know, commissioned to sell the noble lady on behalf of my friend. And before he said anything, he said, "As you were walking down the hallway, I could see that you were filled with the glory of the Lord." And I go, okay. Well, I love him. All my thoughts are toward him. And I just hadn't, so, you know, I was, okay. We prayed, he said, we prayed in silence. And he said, "All I can think to tell you is that communicate everything with this one who had commissioned me." So I thanked him for his time, and I just knew that I was obedient to what I had to do. And then I left. We drove to the ferry, and I told Mother of our small boy that we're going to drive straight to the BC Children's Hospital, have him checked out, which we did do. As soon as we off the ferry, I drove there. They checked him out and gave some Tylenol. But that night back at her place in Chilliwack, I wrote a lament. It must have been about 5 pages long, and it was a lament. It was a lament about Christians. It was a lament. I poured out my heart, and I was grieving. And I was grieving about what had been done to the Lord by the ones who think that they know him. So the last line of my lament was, "Lord, please heal the small boy." And then I was on the couch, so I fell asleep. And then I woke up the next morning and I couldn't remain there. I tried to escape. And I actually drove over to Abbotsford, which means Abbot, Father, Ford. There was a beautiful place called Eagle Mountain there. I'd been up there a number of times, and I'd actually built an altar to the Lord on one of my trips up there. That was while I lived there, still in Canada. So I drove to Abbotsford. I went into, was it a White Spot or somewhere like that? Have a cup of tea, that kind of thing. I tried to escape, but it was really weird, not having a mobile phone. I called back to let her know where I was, because every other call I made went to error. And I knew, okay, the angels are telling me what I'm trying to do by escaping is error. So I phoned to say, "I'm over here, I'll be back at the house soon," which I did. Now, that was a Friday, and my cry had been to be delivered from all of this deception, and the deliverance came on the Tuesday. Long story short, I didn't have to stay there any longer because of the Tuesday deliverance, move into another place, and then await the time to leave Canada to come back to Australia with the small boy who was travelling with me and the one who thought she was Mary, because I took it upon myself to house her in Australia. And so that's the way it played out in Australia, in the house that I'd rented for us when I got back there at 2 Tulip Close. I'd been to the headmaster of the local Christian school, and he agreed to take the small boy on a scholarship and educate him because I asked him to. And he agreed to that. However, what played out, as you can imagine, as she had evicted the angel of the Lord from the garden in BC Canada, Greg's house, she was evicted and left the country. I think it was, she didn't last a week. And it was Adam who actually evicted her, because he recognizes a false prophet, and he rose up against her and she rose up against him. She had made a connection with a man in Sydney. He came out to pick her up, and then 4 days later she left the country to go back to BC. In my mind, it was always before Christ, because it was 235 days after my encounter with Al the angel. Of course, I found Yahweh, the Lord Jesus Christ himself, in my own backyard, but 800 kilometres away, in Melbourne, on Adam's 17th birthday. The information that Al gave me in that interview was that his mother had been born in Australia. And I'm going, oh my God, where in Australia? Is she still alive to ask? And he shakes his head, no. Of course, that was Daphne. And she was born October the 11th, 1912, in Bulli Hospital. And Bulli is an area of the south coast of New South Wales. And of course, all this time later, on the 29th of May 2008, because I phoned Yah, the call lasted 5 minutes on the 31st of March, but on April Fool's Day, the 1st of April, I phoned him again at 2:19 in the afternoon. 2:19 is the cock crowing thrice. I phoned him, all to do with the night watch, yes, and which I hold. Yah left it for me. And we spoke then for 171 minutes and 38 seconds. And I know that because it was all recorded on the Telstra bill that came in the following month. 171 being the length of the Shroud of Turin, but it was also to do with espoused and espousal, etc. So, yes, the 29th of May 2008, Yah returned, and it was there that he placed on my finger my wife ring at the Michael point, 34 degrees 13 minutes south latitude. The 3 unusual chromosomes in Yah's blood, and in Greek is Michael the Archangel. So from the Stanwell Tops lookout, and I was back there on the 29th of May this year, and had, it was all rather remote. What did I do? Yes, I picked up the stone and I left it in Barrel, which is where I found you. So all part of the DVD. But that was my encounter with. Now, Al said to me, "You are my right arm." He didn't say you are the Lord's right arm, but you are my right arm. And of course, when I connected in that very lengthy phone call to tell of my encounter with Al the Angel 235 days before, Yah told me that he encountered Al too in a McDonald's throughout his, I think it was when he was already in Coquitlam. And Yah had given him $1 at the time, and so I knew who Al was. And then Adam himself encountered Al, actually in Australia on a bus journey that he had, and at a bus station in Brisbane. So Al gets around. Now, not surprisingly, it was a surprise to me when I worked it out. Because I left on the 3rd of October, 3:10. Hello! 2022, yeah. Now, Adam's full name, Adam Christopher, which means Christ bearer, Tobias, last name Fura, is 310. And he's been having some remarkable experiences in his life, his story, his journey, as Yah has used him pretty remarkably, so much so that a few days ago he was evangelizing. Amber was there as a witness, and the one he was evangelizing to called him Brian. Oh, sorry. What did you say your name was? And then when Adam said, well, what did you call me? He goes, oh, Ryan. As Adam says, it's Adam. But Amber says, he called you Brian. Oh, my goodness gracious me. So, oh, that's right. And, all right, so me being the right arm of God, listening to the old, we were in the Golden Tulip Hotel in Panchkula, India, when we had 5 wonderful days there. And the measure from the Golden Tulip to 2 Tulip Close, where I was living in Barrel when I found Yah on Adam's birthday, the information that came out of that was remarkable. And Adam, no, not Adam, Yah's just talking very casually in the PowerPoint he prepared that, so Martha and God were in India. Martha and God, Martha and God, Martha and God. It's talking about. And then the pastor who believed in Shimla, St. Michael's Shimla, and he hugged Yah and embraced him as the Christ on the earth. He did not reject at all. So that 5 days we had at the Golden Tulip, Petra was with us. Petra from Germany. She, we picked her up in Delhi, and then we had a rental car. Now, Europeans do not drive in Delhi. No, they don't. But we do. As we drove in Cairo, those years before, 2013. Here we are, 2015, in Delhi, and we rented a car. Okay. But that's how we got around and ended up in Shimla to walk into St. Michael's Church there and the pastor. And I was looking at the photographs from that time with Petra. We had a wonderful time. I was a bit concerned because Petra and I went on our own, and we took hours and hours and hours before we got back to the hotel. He was getting very concerned, but we ended up being guided back by a couple of boys on a motorcycle who drove us from the city out to our hotel, and then refused to take any payment for it because for them it's all about karma. Oh, that's right. Yes, the bracelet. Yes, this bracelet I wear on my right arm. Once Yah left being inside of time, this was part of what he showed me to get. It's all about a bracelet on my right arm as a reminder. Yeah. You are my right arm, said Al. So it continues. It continues because of Yah's teachings and the work we did in introducing these simple protocols to cure people of their diseases. And yeah, I'm working now on a mission to get a document out and gone, and to keep occupied until his return, which I've been told over and over. I'm not telling you, it will be a surprise. And so I've stopped trying to figure things out, because the more I try to figure things out, it won't be a surprise. So as I busy myself not expecting him, I do what I do. And yeah, so there you have it. Al the Angel. Oh, no, I had to tell you because I did. Right. From that day, my interview with Al the Angel, until Pope Benedict departed, having finished his course and was murdered to get him out of here, on December 31st, 2022, just happened to be 5,624 days. Which we all know, if we've been listening and taking note all these years, that within the James Strong's 1890 publication of his Concordance, the dictionary of Hebrew Old Testament and Greek New Testament words, there are 5,624 words in the Greek New Testament. King James 1611. One of the tools given into Yah's hand to use to unfold and reveal. Remember, reveal is disclosure. Apocalypse means revelation, disclosure. One of the tools that he used in what ended up being a 32-year, until he left, revelation of himself, recorded within the measure of his creation. For those who are pure in heart, they shall see God, the image of the Shroud of Turin. Humble in spirit, they don't exalt themselves thinking they know everything. They become like a small child. Then they do see and enter into Yah's kingdom, which comes to the earth. All right, later, guys.